A man stood on a railroad bridge in northern Alabama, gazing down at the fast-moving water 20 feet below. His hands were tied behind his back with a cord, and a rope tightly wrapped around his neck, attached to a sturdy crossbeam above him. The rope hung loosely down to his knees. He stood on a few loose boards placed on the ties supporting the railway tracks, along with his executioners, 2 federal soldiers under the command of a sergeant who might have been a deputy sheriff in civilian life. Nearby, on the same temporary platform, stood a captain in uniform, armed. 2 sentinels stood at each end of the bridge, holding their rifles in the support position, vertical in front of the left shoulder, the hammer resting on the forearm across the chest, an unnatural pose that required them to stand upright. It seemed these 2 soldiers weren't concerned with what was happening in the middle of the bridge. Their role was simply to block access to the ends of the footpath. Beyond one of the sentinels, there was no one visible. The railroad stretched straight into a forest for about 100 yards, then curved and disappeared from sight. It was likely that there was another outpost further ahead. On the opposite bank of the stream was an open area, gently sloping upward toward a stockade made of vertical tree trunks with rifle slits, and a single embrasure that held the muzzle of a brass cannon aimed at the bridge. Halfway up the slope, between the bridge and the fort, stood a company of infantry. They were arranged in a straight line, standing at attention with their rifles' butts on the ground, their barrels slightly angled backward against their right shoulders, hands crossed on the stock. A lieutenant was positioned at the right end of the line, his sword point touching the ground, with his left hand resting on his right. Apart from the group of 4 men in the middle of the bridge, not a single person moved. The company was focused on the bridge, staring unblinking, unmoving. The sentinels, facing the stream's banks, appeared as if they were statues, part of the bridge's decoration. The captain stood with his arms crossed, observing his subordinates silently, offering no indication. Death is a figure that, when expected, should be greeted with formal respect, even by those most accustomed to him. According to military etiquette, silence and stillness are signs of reverence. The man who was about to be hanged appeared to be around 35 years old. Based on his attire, which suggested the lifestyle of a planter, he was likely a civilian. His face had attractive features, with a straight nose, a firm mouth, and a broad forehead. His long, dark hair was combed back neatly, flowing down past his ears to the collar of his well-fitted frock coat. He had a mustache and a pointed beard but no sideburns. His large, dark gray eyes gave off a kind and gentle expression, which seemed out of place for someone facing execution. It was clear that he was not a common criminal. Under the liberal military code, the law allows for the execution of many different kinds of individuals, including gentlemen. Once the preparations were finished, the 2 soldiers moved aside, each lifting the plank they had been standing on. The sergeant turned to face the captain, gave a salute, and positioned himself directly behind him. The captain, in turn, stepped aside by 1 pace. These actions left the condemned man and the sergeant standing at opposite ends of the same plank, which rested across 3 of the bridge's crossties. The plank's end near the civilian nearly, but not entirely, reached a 4th tie. While the plank had been kept in place by the captain's weight, it was now supported by the sergeant's. At the captain's signal, the sergeant would step aside, causing the plank to tilt and sending the condemned man into the gap between 2 ties. The captain found the setup straightforward and efficient in its design. The condemned man's face was uncovered, his eyes unbandaged. He briefly looked down at the plank beneath him, uncertain of his footing, before his gaze shifted to the fast-moving water below. His attention was caught by a piece of driftwood, and he followed it as it bobbed along the current. It seemed to move so slowly, as though the stream itself were sluggish. He shut his eyes, attempting to focus his final thoughts on his family. The beauty of the morning, the golden-hued water, the mist hovering on the banks further down the river, the fort, the soldiers, and the drifting debris had momentarily distracted him. But soon, he became aware of a new interruption. A sharp, metallic sound cut through his thoughts of his loved ones. It was a ringing noise, like the striking of a blacksmith's hammer on an anvil. He was unsure whether the sound was near or far, though it seemed to possess both qualities at once. The rhythmic, slow repetition of the sound reminded him of the tolling of a death bell. He grew anxious with each successive strike, feeling an unsettling sense of dread he couldn't explain. The pauses between the sounds grew longer, becoming maddeningly slow, and the sound itself grew louder and more painful, as if a knife was cutting into his ears. It was unbearable. The source of the noise was the ticking of his watch. Opening his eyes, he looked once again at the water beneath him. A thought crossed his mind: if I could free my hands, I could slip out of the noose and leap into the river. By diving, I could avoid the bullets and swim to the opposite shore, then flee into the woods and make my way home. My family is still safe, beyond the reach of the invaders. As these rapid, desperate thoughts surged through his mind, rather than forming naturally, the captain nodded to the sergeant, signaling him to step aside. Here are the meanings of some of the more difficult words in the first part of the story. 1. Gazing, looking steadily and intently at something. 2. Cord, a strong, flexible rope or string. 3. Stout, strong and sturdy. 4. Crossbeam, a horizontal beam that supports a structure, such as a bridge. 5. Executioners, people who carry out a death sentence. 6. Sentinel, a soldier or guard who stands watch to protect a place. 7. Support, position, a formal rifle position where the rifle is held vertically, resting against the forearm, with the hammer resting on the forearm. 8. Carriage, the posture or way of carrying the body. 9. Planking, flat boards used to cover or support something. 10. Blockaded, blocked or obstructed from passing through. 11. Sentinels guards or soldiers stationed to keep watch and protect a place. 12. Embrasure, a small opening in a wall or fortification, usually for the purpose of allowing a weapon like a cannon or rifle to be fired through it. 13. Muzzle, the end of the barrel of a firearm or cannon from which the projectile is discharged. 14. Stonily, in a manner that is cold, emotionless, or impassive, resembling a stone. 15. Parade rest, a formal military stance where a soldier stands with their feet apart and hands clasped behind their back. 16. Deference, respectful submission or yielding to the opinion, wishes, or judgment of another. 17. Dignitary, a person of high rank or authority, especially in government or the military. 18. Etiquette, the customary code of polite behavior in society or among members of a particular profession or group. 19. Fixity, the state of being fixed, stable, or unchanging. 20. Manifestations, the outward display or expression of something, often referring to behavior or actions that convey a particular emotion or respect. These terms, used together in this context, describe a highly formal military scene with deep respect and stillness for the arrival of death. 21. Engaged. In this context, engaged means involved or occupied with something, here referring to the man being involved in the act of being hanged. 22. Civilian. A person who is not a member of the military or police force, typically a member of the general public. 23. Planter. Someone who owns or works on a plantation, usually referring to a person involved in agriculture, particularly growing crops like cotton, tobacco, or sugar. 24. Features, the distinct parts of a person's face, like the nose, mouth, eyes, etc. 25. Frock coat, a long, formal coat worn by men, typically from the 18th or 19th centuries. 26. Mustache, facial hair that grows on the upper lip. 27. Beard, facial hair that grows on the chin, cheeks, and jaw. 28. Whiskers, facial hair, often referring to the hair on the cheeks or the longer hairs around the mouth, but the man in the text does not have any. 29. Expression, the look on a person's face that reveals their emotions or feelings. 30. Vulgar, common, crude, or lacking refinement. In this context, it means someone who is not distinguished or respectable. 31. Assassin, a person who kills someone, usually a prominent figure, for political or personal reasons. 32. Liberal, in this context, it refers to something being broad or flexible, especially relating to laws or rules that allow for a range of situations. 33. Military code, a set of laws or rules governing the conduct of military personnel. 34. Provision, a stipulation or arrangement made in advance, in this case referring to the military code providing for the execution of certain people. 35. Gentleman, a man of high social status or respectability. 36. Condemned, sentenced to death or punishment, often used to describe someone facing execution. 37. Saluted, to give a gesture of respect, usually by raising a hand to the forehead, especially in the military. 38. Unsteadfast, not steady or firm, unstable or uncertain. 39. Swirling, moving in a twisting or spiraling motion, often rapidly. 40. Driftwood, wood that is carried along the surface of a body of water, often broken and floating. 42. Sluggish, moving slowly or lacking energy, often used to describe something slow or lethargic. 43. Plank, a long, flat piece of wood, used in construction or as a surface to stand on. 44. Crossed eyes, the horizontal beams that support the tracks of a railway bridge or similar structure. 45. Brooding, deeply thinking, often with a sense of sadness or worry. 46. Percussion, a sound made by striking, like a drum or a hammer hitting something. 47. Immeasurably, beyond measurement, impossible to quantify. 48. Apprehension, a feeling of fear or anxiety about something that may happen. 49. Maddening, causing extreme irritation or frustration. 50. Trust, in this context, likely a typo or misinterpretation of thrust, meaning a sudden push or force. 51. Noose, a loop of rope, often used to hang someone. 52. Invader, an enemy who enters a place by force, often with the intention to conquer. 53. Doomed, certain to fail or meet with an unpleasant fate, often referring to inevitable death or destruction. 54. Sergeant, a military rank, typically above private but below officer. Let me know if you need any further clarification.